Hello, everybody out there in radio and internet land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. As always, following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. So a couple of things before we get started. Some of you may be watching this on YouTube. We are going to start recording video content again. So just a heads up. And with that, I'm hoping maybe next week we'll start doing Facebook Live again. So that'll probably be Sundays from around 4 to 6. And that'll be nifty too, because, if you're a longtime fan of the show, that means you can hop on, interact with us directly, get into the group chats and stuff. So we do have a lot to talk about on the show today, and we will be joined by some of my co-hosts a little bit later on, which hasn't happened in a while. Some of you know we've been on kind of a soft hiatus, a lot of family issues going on that I have to attend to. But man, there's been a lot going on this week, and it's time that we kind of unpack a lot of it. So I think before we're joined by my co-hosts, I want to highlight some really important and very good quality local journalism going on, talking about it's a national issue, a national crisis, and they did NowKalamazoo did the due diligence of seeing how these issues play out here in the Kalamazoo public school system. So I'm just going to go ahead and read through this article here. This is from NowKalamazoo. KPS educators in administration at odds on solving teacher shortage. This was written by Ben Lando. "35% of Kalamazoo public school teachers are somewhat or very dissatisfied with their job, and more than 44% are planning to leave the district, the education field, or retire within the next 3 years, according to a survey of KPS teachers conducted by NowKalamazoo. Respondents to the survey, which was voluntary and for whom NowKalamazoo agreed to keep anonymous, said the challenges to bring a teacher this past school year the challenges being brought to a teacher this school year are far and away related to a learning environment that is lax on responsiveness to student behavioral issues and an excessive number of students in class." It's interesting to me, just as a quick aside, Kalamazoo has this reputation of being, college town, and, we have the Kalamazoo Promise. It's trying to usher people into higher education, but our actual school system is experiencing a lot of the very same deficits and shortcomings that we see across the country in other school systems that maybe don't necessarily have that focus or that emphasis. Anyway, in order to keep teachers, the respondents said, the most important tools were compensation, reducing class sizes, and adding staff to help students. The results pose a conundrum for Darren Slade, who began as KPS superintendent on July 1st, as negotiations continue over a new teacher's contract, which expires this August. The results of the survey underscore a local struggle within a nationwide effort to hire and retain teachers. The problem was growing prior to, but has gotten exponentially worse during the pandemic, according to a December 2022 report by the Economic Policy Institute. So far this summer, KPS turnover in between school years is around 5% of teaching staff, or filling around 40 positions. That's the low end of the average of as many as 70 positions to fill over the summer, the district says. In an email response to questions, then interim superintendent Cindy Green attributed it to normal trends such as retirement, relocation, and teachers exiting the profession. It's a constant kind of in and out going. That's not unusual. This has been exacerbated by a dearth in certified teachers and the drop in people entering the field in college. Which, again, largely goes back to, it doesn't pay enough. Don't really see a robust future in it. I know back in the Stone Age, when I was in college, I considered being a teacher. And even then, we had a fairly better economy at the time. I was looking at some of the wages and some of the other associated difficulties, having to relocate far and away to find a job, and having to go through recertification processes from state to state. There's a lot involved being a teacher, and the rewards are very minimum. Other than this kind of a culturally enshrined one of like, oh, you're supposed to love teaching for teaching's sake. I mean, I think more people would probably love teaching if they were able to live off of their wages, but I digress. There's also a cyclical nature of turnover when teachers who started during a big hiring push then become eligible for retirement at the same time. When asked what they are doing to retain teachers, both the KPS Communications Office and Green said the primary tool was compensation. Kalamazoo Public Schools tries to be proactive when it comes to working on teacher attraction and retention. In 2018, the school district set the base salary for new teachers at $40,000. In general, our teachers' salaries are strong for the area, which may technically be true, but 40 grand is still not all that much, especially, if you're raising a family going on. The district communications office credited the annual raise structure negotiated in the teacher's contract, along with the one-time bonus given to employees this past year. When asked about teacher compensation packages at KPS under the current working conditions, 57% of survey respondents said it was equivalent to or higher than comparable school districts. When asked what KPS was doing in addition to compensation to address teacher satisfaction and retention, Green only referred to an extensive professional development program to assist and support teachers. It's kind of like one of those mealy-mouthed non-answers right there. This is where the district administrations and its teachers diverge starkly. The survey offered a list of two dozen commonly expressed challenges facing KPS teachers and asked respondents to rank them based on the impact on job satisfaction. More than 73% said student behavioral issues were a significant impact, followed by class size at 68.46%. Shortages of mental health supports for students, 57%, shortages of teachers at 54%, and a lack of substitute teachers at 54%. Just over 50% of respondents said the emphasis on standardized testing and the shortage of support staff in schools had a significant impact. Now, just look back to a couple themes that we talk about a lot. Thinking of like austerity, the investment in our public, not only public school systems, but public services more broadly. And time used to be that there were health professionals in every school. This used to be kind of the standard more than the exception. Largely, these have been scaled back due to budget cuts. You still have counselors and that sort of thing, but typically you don't necessarily have mental health professionals on site, which these days is perhaps more important than ever. And what was largely has kind of replaced that has been the SRO, the Student Resource Officer. The police filling gaps that have been cut out of our social safety net, which also, again, kind of feeds into the school to prison pipeline, to something that we need to be very cognizant of, especially the urban school district that Kalamazoo is. The majority of the free-form comments regarding challenges submitted by respondents to the survey cited the stress of teaching due to conditions they blamed on KPS administration, both during the school day and the work expected after hours, class sizes that are too large for a quality learning environment, and a lack of support for students in need and lack of disciplinary options when needed. When asked what are the three challenges that impact your experience the most, the top two by far were student behavioral issues that got around 69% and class size at 52%. This is followed by lack of support from administrators around 20%, lack of work-life balance around 18%, shortage of substitute teachers at 17%, and a shortage of student mental health support, again, around 16%. When asked to select three solutions to teacher recruitment and retention that would be the most impactful, the respondents said three things pulled the highest. Higher salary and benefits around 78%, reducing class size around 62%, and hiring more staff to support students around 43%. And I want to emphasize here too. The teachers are, of course, demanding to make a better wage, but most of these other demands loop back into the quality of education that the students are getting. So, this is really based on concern about the quality of education people are getting in Kalamazoo public schools. Um, and again, as I kind of loop back the article, this is the city of the Kalamazoo Promise. This is the city that is trying to launch ostensibly most of its student body into higher education. And since 2006, we're coming up on almost 20 years of the Kalamazoo Promise. This has still been a nut that has not really been cracked, which is to say the quality of our school system has to be much higher if we actually want students from our school system to be able to take advantage of that scholarship program. Otherwise, it's just kind of marketing for the city. So going on, it also said 26% of respondents said their average class size was more than 30 students. 51% said it was between 25 and 30. When asked what the target class size is and what it is doing to reduce the number of students in the classroom, citing the concerns raised by teachers, Green wrote that the district does its best to maintain smaller class sizes, especially at lower grade levels and in schools that have higher numbers of students on free and reduced lunch. Um, going on to say, they're talking a little bit more about teacher retention, school lunch, but I wanted to just kind of emphasize that again the really central contradiction here is this the idea that we have such a big emphasis on education here in the city of Kalamazoo, but we still have these issues with our school system comparable to most many other cities in Michigan, most of the rest of the country. Um, and it's been almost a state of suspended animation. Granted, there's been really great community figures who have stepped up to try to close that gap of people who aren't graduating, who aren't going on to college or trade school, and the work is commendable. And you have seen the fruits of their labor. But what we need is actual institutional significant investment into the school system to hire more teachers, to have smaller classes. Otherwise, again, as I said, you are only going to have a very select pool of students who will be able to take advantage of that scholarship program after they graduate. So anyway, that was an article from Now Kalamazoo. It's written by Ben Lando, KPS educators and administration at odds on solving teacher shortage. I encourage folks, go read that at your leisure. Really good reporting. So our next thing I think I'm going to focus on, talk about a little bit. So I wanted to talk about an update. This is from our friends at LeftVoice, and we're going to be talking about, there's again a big strike wave going on this summer. You'll love to see it. We're going to be talking about SAG-AFTRA a little bit later in the show, and the writer's strike, of course. Also, UPS may be on the cusp of a strike right now. Well, I wanted to give an update on some of our comrades out at in Ann Arbor, University of Michigan. They are continuing their struggle for better wages over at the University of Michigan. And again, if you follow this, we've talked about this more earlier in the summer, but their struggle continues, and we wanted to give you a pertinent update. This comes from our friends at LeftVoice. Its headline is, "The University of Michigan exploits graduate workers and refuses to pay a living wage." It's written by Ryan McCarty. It was published on July 11th. Graduate student instructors at the University of Michigan, like so many other grad student workers across the country, have been on strike for a living wage and better workplace conditions. The Grad Student Union, the Graduate Employee Organization, has been struggling against the university and its slate of million and billionaire administrators since last winter, arguing for a raise to meet the annual $38,000 basic cost of living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Graduate instructors currently earn about $25,000 a year, and GEO reports that 80% of its members are rent burdened, meaning they pay more than a third of their wages in rent, and 1 in 5 has delayed medical treatment because of that cost. Given today's skyrocketing food and energy costs, these workers simply don't make enough to live. In response to these dire material conditions, graduate student workers, like many other groups of underpaid workers, have frequently drawn on the concept of a living wage when making demands for pay increases. This frames the GEO's demands for higher wages as a reasonable request of the university administration and the publicly elected Board of Regents, with whom GEO is negotiating. A reasoned argument that couldn't be dismissed. Still, these calls for a living wage have been grossly manipulated by university bosses, illustrating the need for working people to take more and different approaches to struggles for higher wages. The phrase living wage has been thrown around with increasing frequency in cases like the National Fight for 15. The most common measure of a living wage is the MIT Living Wage Calculator, which averages costs of basic necessities in a given area and tallies up what a worker would have to pay for such cost of living. These calculations offer important reality checks when considering if workers are actually paid enough to cover housing. Sorry about that, folks. I had to attend something real quick. So, going on, the LeftVoice article, they point out really importantly that just focusing on an hourly living wage can be kind of limiting if we ignore the fact that living wage is calculated for full-time employment only. And if an employer pays $15 an hour, but offers workers only 20 hours of work per week, then those workers still aren't earning enough to live on. Since low-wage workers are much more likely to be denied full-time employment by bosses, simply fighting for a higher hourly wage is insufficient. This is the case for University of Michigan students, who are paid about $18 an hour, but only for 20 hours a week of work. They are not paid for their second job as researchers and are generally forbidden from taking on outside work. They often go without pay over the summer as well, leaving them far below the yearly $38,000 minimum that it costs for a single person without children to live in Ann Arbor. And that's about $88,000 for a single person with one child. So essentially, graduate student instructors do make a living in hourly terms, but with too few paid hours, which doesn't provide them enough to cover the bills. These contradictions have been cynically manipulated by the University of Michigan administration and the Board of Regents, all of whom have spent most of the last 10 months presenting numbers to show that grad students make a high hourly wage, ignoring that they aren't paid for enough hours to make up for the rising cost of living. The contempt for graduate workers' experiences has been clear in these exchanges. In a May meeting of the University Regents, Amir Fleischman, GEO's contract committee chair, was mocked by Regents Chair Paul Brown, who suggested that graduate student instructors are only part-time workers, so they do not deserve a living wage of $38,000 a year. Going on to ask if Fleischman and the union thought that someone working only 1 hour a semester should still receive a living wage. So kind of dripping with a little gross sarcasm. So, in the July Regents meeting, Regent Michael Boehm fell into an absurd kind of solipsistic idealism, explaining to GEO President Jared Eno that it's what you believe in your mind that causes the reality that you have in front of you, suggesting that graduate students just need to look at the university's offer in a different way, regardless of the material facts that a raise of $100 a month does not cover rent increases of up to $300 a month, which are common in the city of Ann Arbor. The regents were largely silent on questions of rent increases, perhaps at least partially because a large percentage of Ann Arbor rental units are owned by Regent Ron Weiser, a billionaire Trump donor and former Michigan GOP party chair. In response to an email, Regent Jordan Acker described himself as a lifetime supporter of organized labor, even as he denied workers substantial wage increases. He said he was mainly interested in balancing our values as an institution and my fiduciary duties as a trustee, referencing the regent's role in overseeing the university's more than $17 billion endowment. In sum, The university and its administration claim to pay a living wage while workers do not, in fact, receive a living wage. On one hand, this is just capitalist exploitation at work. It's never a surprise when bosses, including self-styled labor ally Democrats on the Board of Regents, are willing to throw workers under the bus in a mad rush to talk about great progressive institutions. Reason arguments about living wages weren't enough to change their minds because these regents were acting in their position as bosses, whose interests directly oppose those of the workers who cannot pay their bills. Even worse, perhaps, is the way these bosses have portrayed GEO's demands to other working people. Because of discrepancies between an hourly living wage and a wage that actually allows workers to cover all their living expenses, the university has publicly claimed to be paying higher than average wages, even as the workers struggle to make ends meet. The cynical games about what living wage actually means are emblematic of the callous disregard capitalists have for the workers' living conditions. And we should point out this disregard whenever possible. Like many living wage advocates, we call out the sheer inhumanity of denying working people their everyday means to exist. But on the other hand, the responses to call for living wages that we see from the University of Michigan suggest that additional tactics might be necessary. At its heart, the living wage argument is based on an ethics that capitalists simply do not live up to. So it will also be important for workers and their allies to loudly point out who is creating the value in the workplace, then demand that they are paid for that value. Graduate instructors don't deserve more money because it's the right thing for benevolent bosses to do. They deserve more money because undergraduates are paying a lot to take classes taught by those graduate instructors. So if we wanted to figure out how much the university is exploiting the labor of its grad workers, we would start by figuring out how much value graduate workers are creating and how much surplus value the university is taking instead of paying the workers. It's a pretty simple bit of math, really. The university charges about $16.7 thousand for up to 18 credits a semester over 2 semesters for in-state students. That's $464 per credit hour if the student takes all of the credits they can in the semester. And a 4-credit class costs the student $1,859. For out-of-state and international students, the yearly $55,334 tuition means they pay $6,148 per class. So, for an 18-student class, the university gets between $33.4 thousand and $110.6 thousand, depending on the ratio of in and out-of-state students. Taking that a step further, we can see that a grad worker who teaches in the fall and winter semesters brings in between $66.9 thousand and $221.3 thousand per academic year. In 2022, the university reported that 52% of students were in-state. So we can say that if a grad worker teaches roughly half in-state and half out-of-state students, then one course earns the university $72,000. An instructor teaching fall and winter earns the university $144,000. That means even if the university paid a grad instructor the $38,000 a year, which is what the union is asking for, it would still bring in about $106.1 thousand in extra cash per grad student worker over the course of the academic year. Again, still making profit hand over fist. In the English department writing program alone, the 55 graduate student workers who teach first-year writing in the fall and winter would collectively bring in about $5.8 million after the increases GEO is demanding. Without the increases, though, the university keeps $6.5 million. Clearly, underpaying the workers who are creating the value in the first place is a profitable endeavor. When faced with such hard facts, the university administrators and their apologists would certainly argue that there are a lot of other costs that go into running a school: libraries, maintenance, utilities, administrative staff, additional programs, etc. And it is true that a detailed accounting would be necessary to further develop arguments about the rate of exploitation of graduate workers. But if graduate student instructors are providing this much surplus value, it seems likely that those costs must be covered fairly quickly. And of course, a large part of the money for running the publicly funded university comes from government sources, as the 2022 through 23 budget reports, including $386 million from the state of Michigan and 1.18 billion from federal government programs. With these facts in mind, it rings rather hollow when bosses claim that the university needs to underpay its employees so that it can make up for other expenses. Because the scale of the difference between tuition dollars and teacher pay is so striking, putting that wide divide right in the public eye might create greater support for GEO and undermine the disingenuous responses the university has made to call for a living wage. And more broadly, modeling this kind of value analysis might be useful for connecting GEO struggles for a living wage with similar struggles across the working class. All workers deserve a living wage, but when making that argument, it is important to emphasize our human needs as working people and the ethics of providing us with the resources to maintain a decent standard of life. But we can also look to concrete ways to point out that we are the ones producing the wealth of society, and it's high time that we are paid accordingly. Again, that's an article from Ryan McCarty. Headline was, "The University of Michigan exploits graduate workers, refuses to pay a living wage." I'm going to pause the recording real quick, folks. We will be right back. A quick reminder, everybody out there listening, you can find Media Cyphers in several ways. We are on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and we have a podcast you can find on most podcasting apps, Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. And again, we'll be sharing more video content from here on out. So get subscribed. That's a big important thing. And tell your friends. Again, the algorithms have been bad for left-wing media across the board, and we really do depend on word of mouth to encourage people to check out the show. Thank you very much, and keep on listening to Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution. All right, everybody, we're back. This is Media Cyphers, and joined by my co-hosts, Lawrence and Norah are on the line. How y'all doing today?
Doing okay. Just got back from out of town, and it was a nice week.
Yeah, I literally just got back from Fort Wayne. I had to go and went and supported one of my friend Jocelyn. She just got done throwing her first dance competition that she was holding in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was a fantastic event, lovely event. Shout out to Jocelyn and everybody that went out and supported that event. It was crazy. I can't wait for
that's really great, man. Glad to hear it. I think gonna move into some crappy news. No, all puns intended. But there's a recent wastewater leak on the Kalamazoo River, and it's gotten some attention. But there's a couple things that I think it was important to point out and talk about on the show here. So on Thursday, there's an advisory that went into effect from Kalamazoo, the Patterson Street Bridge in Kalamazoo, the D Avenue Bridge in Cooper Township, after more than 1.5 million gallons of partially treated wastewater was released into the river. That advisory was lifted as of Saturday the 15th. But basically what happened is a disinfection feed failure at the city's wastewater treatment plant. The system was fixed and fully functioning just before midnight. But yeah, as we said, about 1.5 million gallons of wastewater ended up getting into the river. And again, just some quick notes on that. And there's not a ton of other context in a lot of stories. It's been reported by local outlets, but I think you see, when that kind of runoff is allowed to go into our rivers, that's an example of these types of systemic failures, which again also results from some of the broader critiques we've talked about on the show time and time again about infrastructure that is not properly funded, or there's not enough personnel there to properly monitor those conditions. And it's a sad state of affairs where this ends up being kind of a cliff note in the weekly news cycle. But for a lot of people, again, a lot of people fish out of the Kalamazoo River, do recreation activities, and it presents a clear and present danger to the public health. And so when our infrastructure drops the ball like this, we always need to look at, what are the larger issues that go into these problems coming about. A lot of it is public disinvestment, that sort of thing. And again, it's the Kalamazoo River has certainly generations of people have been dealing with various issues. Of course, back our elders in the 60s, from 60s to 70s, tell us that it was just toxic with factory runoff back in the day. And more recently, we see a bunch of doo-doo getting itself into the Kalamazoo River. So I don't know if anybody has quick thoughts on that before we move on, but I just thought it was important to highlight, this really gross example of what happens when our infrastructure fails here in the city.
I mean, it's time and time again we see stories like this pop up, not just here in our city, but also nationally. I don't know if y'all caught the story that half of the drinking water in major cities is tainted with forever chemicals. So tainted water in Kalamazoo, it is as common as everywhere else, and it is not. It's unfortunate that it's something that we have to talk about, but it's also unfortunate that it's like this isn't we're not the canary in the coal mine. We are in the collapsing coal mine, and our infrastructure across the country is failing, and it's millions of people whose water is not safe. Outside the fact that a lot of Kalamazoo people, Kalamazoo residents, still doesn't trust the water ever since the spill in 2012. So this is just compounding more and more distrust in our systems of government and in our systems that are supposed to protect our people. And I wouldn't be surprised if worse things are or we end up finding that worse things have been dumped in our water at this point.
I think it's very likely that something like that has happened that we might not even hear about, because how many corporations are, using Michigan as a place to get rid of some of their excess, because there's so much water here, they find it tempting to either use or exploit. And it's really, really going to be unfortunate for us in the long term. Like, even when we do get good news, like a lawsuit going forward towards graphic packaging, it still comes with this. Like, a lot of different towns across the country are having their own infrastructure failures that's very much connected with these sort of environmental issues. I think a good example is, the amount of fires that came up when the bridge collapsed in Pennsylvania, or even the Flint water crisis, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And you think to the way that mega corporations like Nestle are actively essentially stealing our groundwater in this state for pennies on the dollar. So clean, fresh Michigan drinking water for Nestle Corporation, doo-doo water for the rest of us. And these are something that need to really be at the forefront of both the critique, analysis, and activism for Michiganders, especially in the years to come, where our access to fresh water is going to become increasingly important, especially as the tolls of climate change ravage the ecosystem in the decades to come. It's going to be all the more important to protect those sources of fresh water, and also make sure they're not monopolized by corporations who simultaneously pollute, the public drinking water and the public air. And kind of in line with that, Nora, you made reference to it. There is an update on the long, far too long standing story of graphic packaging, which is in a way good news, but it's good news and bad news, which is to say, so a lawsuit surrounding the gas emissions from graphic packaging has been given the green light to continue forward. A federal judge refused to toss out claims of private nuisance and negligence in a class action lawsuit. The lawsuit basically alleges that gas emissions from the mill violated the Clean Air Act and Northside neighbors' civil rights. And again, this follows the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services years-long study that found hydrogen sulfide emissions in the Northside area that were often over the EPA's level for safe lifetime exposure. Also, emissions from the port are linked to graphic packaging and the Kalamazoo Water Reclamation Plant, which we were also kind of just talking about. And as we talked about before, this led to healthcare issues for people on the north side, asthma-related problems, hospitalizations in the area around the factory water plant, significantly higher than the rest of Michigan. If Kalamazoo has its own sacrifice zone that is predominantly over in the city's densest Black and working class neighborhood. If you want an example of environmental classism and racism, there it is, kind of staring us right in the face.
As the local Northside resident on this panel, I concur and agree with what you were just saying. It's a good thing that this lawsuit continues. It is also, in many ways, very upsetting that it even had to be questioned. It's upsetting that it even had to be questioned, that the residents here's lives have been harmed dramatically because of the for-profit nature of this company. This shouldn't even be something that we need to be debating. This should be something that the residents should be getting, should not just have more say in, but we should be fixing. Because how many lives have been ruined or lost because of their pollution? How many families have had to deal with long-term effects like asthma and other health-related issues? Myself, I've had asthma all of my life, and a lot of it could be linked to the pollution that is going on the north side, and that pollution is in large part to graphic packaging and the other facilities over here that use our neighborhood as a sacrifice. It's personal to me, and it bothers me on a fundamental level that we're fighting for the right to not be poisoned. And we literally have corporations that's like, nah, y'all are okay. Y'all can die for us to have more profits.
No, for real. And as you know, if you've been following our reporting on the graphic packaging issues through the years, you'll probably remember we talked about how this lawsuit is super necessary because the corporation Left and Own Devices are basically offering peanuts to people in Northside, job placement programs and fairs and stuff.
They're offering jobs to people that they are poisoning. I want people to understand this. They are offering jobs to people that they are poisoning. This is like if you are allergic to, let's say you're allergic to peanuts, and if it's airborne, you can have an allergic reaction. And people at Jiffy are all offering you a job.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's, that's
It's
literally what it's like. It's like, yeah, you know what? Instead of offering me a job, how about you just don't poison my neighborhood? Can you
yeah. It's
not
like, what do you call a job that's poisoning your neighbor? Is that a living wage or a dying wage? I don't know.
that's
Oof.
no,
Well said.
that's not even a dying wage. That is a death sentence. Because where are you working? Where are you living? You're living and working in the area that's poisoning you and everyone around you.
Mhm.
You have
That's another
signed
one
up
of
to die.
the many contradictions of capitalism, because they won't give you clean water, but they'll still expect you to work without it. Like, not a good opportunity for people.
Yeah, and again, this is also like a bigger national problem. I mean, Nora's in the Chicago area, and I know we've had some stories from there recently about industrial areas near again the poorer and traditionally less white areas of that city, causing people a lot of environmental problems. And again, the corporations kind of just scooting things under the rug. Um, but
Wait,
yeah,
Nora, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a study that just came out about Chicago's drinking water? Like, what was it, 1/3 of the city that does not have clean drinking water? What,
I think it
that was
was
a
either 1/3 of or 1/4. I'm not sure where it stood last time, but I know that the southeast side is full of factories that aren't, taking care of they're like polluting the water and the air, basically. So people will get really sick when they live there. And even so, a lot of these factories have primarily automated, so that they don't even give the jobs to the neighborhoods like they used to. The same could be said for nearby in Northwest Indiana, where you have a lot of steel plant towns, but that again have mostly automatized. People have left, and those who are stuck with clumbering infrastructure in their cities.
mhm. So, I think we're going to continue to follow this, and particularly see where the lawsuit goes. But it's a problem that our folks here in Kalamazoo, especially folks on the north side, have been dealing with way too long. And it's really appalling that the graphic
uh,
packaging just continues to get away with this.
can I give you the water shout out to the water defenders. The water defenders are out there doing the Lord's work. An article from them, and this is we're talking about Chicago drinking water. Um, many people drink tap water in Chicago. Around 20% of the population relies mainly on bottled water. So 20% of
Relies
the
on bottled
population,
water.
20% of the population relies on bottled water. It isn't known how many households choose to filter their tap water before drinking it. If you are concerned about the lead, wait, I'm trying to finish reading the article. I'm reading the article as we talk about it.
Yeah, that's crazy. You think back to just a few years ago, like we were doing all the big bottled water drives for, Flint when that happened. And it, this is just kind of a regular state of affairs for, some of the poorest people in the country, like, the people who really can't afford to be going out and buying bottled water all the time are the people who are basically foisted with the bill of these corporations and their environmental malfeasance.
Yeah, could be considered could be considered in Chicago's tap water. Lead in water results from households polluted corrosion. I'm sorry, I'm reading this. Or corrosion in natural resources. In Chicago's tap water, lead levels were found to be 5.6 parts per billion at the highest testing, which is below the 15 points per billion allowable limit. But yeah, where Lead levels are more corrosive towards younger children, since 40 to 60% of them are infants. 40 to 60%. That being said, we have not noticed that the lead contamination has been mainly cause of more popular from water crisis. They talk about from water crisis, so it's best to take measures to protect yourself. They are literally saying that it's better for you to protect yourself by drinking bottled water than drink the tap water in Chicago. Wow. Wow. All right. I just need also to remind people that just like in Kalamazoo, and just like the water issues that happen in Kalamazoo, we have to bathe in this. We have to cook our foods in this. We have to wash our dishes in this water. So when we talk about these water issues, I need you to also remember those things. When you use a bathroom, that water has to go somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it is. We cannot function without it. So the more tainted our stuff is, the more likely it's going to be a problem for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Water is life.
Water is life, folks. Yeah. And even if the lawsuit goes through 100%, what we really need is graphic packaging to own up, work through the process so it doesn't pollute the neighborhood. Because hey, people can't eat money, and best case scenario is like people use that money to relocate, and then you end up gutting the Northside neighborhood, which is a vibrant place for people to live, give or take the noxious fumes coming from the factory.
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, even if they gentrified, let's say because we've seen it, they're trying to gentrify pieces of the North Side, and they built new housing that's close to where graphic packaging and the water treatment facility is. When they realize that it's their water, that it's all the new condos and housing that's built over there, when they realize that their water is also tainted, regardless of how close to downtown they are, what are they going to do? Oh, you're going to tell people to sell their house. It's kind of hard to sell your house when the water that's coming out of the tap is poison.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You're not gonna get I'm not gonna get a good resale value here.
No. And they did mention too, like it does drive down property values, which I mean it's a whole thing talking about like housing being a commodity in the first place, but it does also lend itself to generational poverty. We've talked about this on the show a lot before too, is when you degrade the value of housing stock in predominantly Black neighborhoods, that ties into that longer legacy of disenfranchisement and redlining that Black folks in Kalamazoo and the rest of the country have had to deal with for generations.
Exactly. And I think that it's something that would be very hard to remedy, because even if this lawsuit with graphic packaging goes through, like they're asking for what, $600,000? Like, considering how expensive medical bills in this country are alone, that's not going to cover that many people.
No, not at all. And it could be something with Flint where like people got sent out like checks for a couple grand each, which at the end of the day are real pennies compared to the kind of trauma and health issues that they've had to deal with for the better part of a decade out there.
You want to know what the solution is? For every household that's been affected by their pollution, they have to give up that many millions in their profit. Their profit has to go to the residents for every household that they have polluted. And even then, that wouldn't be enough, because they would need to also stop polluting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think you did get into something that's like these people really only care about their bottom line, and you do it if a level of money beyond just the cost of business, you might make them start paying attention. kind of what our comrades in the acting and writers union are looking at right now. We'll be getting to that story in a little bit. I think
wait, we've been gone so long. Did we get a chance to cover the submersible story?
No.
Okay,
No.
okay. I
Man.
know. We've been gone so long. There's been so many stories. There's only one reason why I want to bring up this story. Never allow your employer to work you to death. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, I mean, I bring up the Breakfast Club once in a while because I find certain stuff that they do on there very funny. There's stuff on there that's definitely questionable. But Charlamagne the God gave the submersible company Donkey of the Day. The reason why they, and for those who do not know, Donkey of the Day is a segment where he gives people credit for being stupid. The reason why the company of the submersible company got Donkey of the Day is because during the search and rescue of the submersible, they had a job opening for submersible drivers. During the rescue, they didn't even find them yet, and the company already had a job posting for submersible drivers. Like that story came out, I think it was like a week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, oh man, before your body is even in your casket, those companies are trying to replace you.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like the billionaires making decisions at places like graphic packaging, like as I incidents like that, I hope like kind of chip away at this mythology of like billionaire exceptionalism, because like that dude thought he could outsmart the laws of physics.
I mean, you can try. You probably won't succeed, but you can try. No. And he failed.
The ocean depths were like, bet. No.
you're like, oh no. See, no, because other people also died, including a 19-year-old, and I was sad about that. But at the same time, I'm just like, the dude skirted regulations. He bragged about skirting regulations. He bragged about how he doesn't need all the regulations that comes with a submersible vehicle, and it blew up underwater. Because when physics comes calling, it doesn't come calling quietly. We've all seen the Final Destination movies. Physics usually win, and it's not pretty.
Oh no, that's very true.
Oh man, but yeah. Right. I wanted that. It was supposed to be a funny story, and the only reason why I want to bring that up is like, look, I know that we all have to work in this capitalist system, and I understand that sometimes our jobs make us do overtime and all that. Just, I want to remind you, they do not work yourself to death, because they will replace you after you die, usually before your body is in the ground.
That's
Yep.
100%.
One thing that's significant, I think, about the submarine story is this is just normal rich people stuff, is just cut corners to save a buck, like make more profit, and this time it harms other rich people instead of everyone else. That's the real twist of the story.
It's kind of a rare exception.
And it is a rare exception. It's a rare condition in this day and age.
Very, very similar to the original Titanic boat, ironically enough.
Yeah, it's like James Cameron actually pointed that out. It's like there's some interesting parallels, like the same kind of hubris that was involved. It's
dog. You could see the Titanic on Google. We have smartphones. You could have gotten that close on Google. You didn't need to go down there.
So I think I do want to pivot. So there's a couple of big stories I still need to hit on, and so there's three really. So there's some new developments in the long winding story of student debt relief. There's also it's kind of like a tale of various transphobias. There's a story out of Hamtramck, the story out of Traverse City, and then there's also some media criticism wanted to get to. Of course, there's also the actors strike, which is big news. So Again, y'all have been joining me for a while. I don't know if there's one maybe we want to hit on first.
I think we should talk about the strikes, actually. The fact that the writers, the actors, the world's largest Starbucks, and almost UPS are all striking at once. I mean, UPS isn't there yet, but it's very likely to go through. That's not insignificant. This is really alarming, and it's going to be huge, an earthquake of a labor movement, I think, because if Americans pay attention to nothing else, they pay attention to their TVs. You know what I'm saying? And this new model of streaming has, been used by the ruling class as a way to underpay actors and writers. And they're fed up. Like, you're making, let's say, a fraction of your average salary, even like in Kalamazoo, and you still have to pay LA rent. There's no way that's a sustainable business model. And another example of rich people just being willing to sacrifice others is the fact that Disney CEO Bob Iger, I believe I'm getting his name right, said that the plan is to wait them out until they lose their houses. Like, this is
wait,
like
wait,
this is like siege warfare talk. Like,
hold on, hold on. Say that one more time for the people in the back. What did he say?
The Disney CEO said the plan is to wait out the strike until they lose their houses.
Yeah, so I want to highlight that because it's rare that we get, they're really just telling on themselves, because that's from basically kind of some leaked stuff coming out of the AMPTP, which is the Association of Bosses, basically, and what they said is that all the big studios are determined to break the writer's strike. They quote unquote believe that by October, most writers will be running out of money after 5 months on the picket lines and no work. The end game is to allow things to drag on until union members start losing their apartments and losing their homes. And other people representing the bosses at the studios called it a cruel but necessary evil. And it's very rare that you see capitalism take the mask off like that. But yeah, they said that. There's actually kind of the thing that's gone viral. If you're familiar, Ron Perlman played Hellboy, Sons of Anarchy, and kind of coyly says, like, there's many ways to lose a house. Kind of talking about some militant working direct action, legal reasons. That's a joke, but this is the kind of cruelty that is running the American studio system. And I wanted to touch on a couple things. I think Nora kind of alluded to this, and it's important for all of us to have solidarity. It's a very exciting moment because the writers and the acting strike joining together, talk about starving people out. Let's see the CEOs try to take on the writers and actors at the same time. But it's one of the most visible public unions maybe in the world. People who are celebrities are part of this union. I didn't even know this. Fran Drescher is the president of the union. She had a fiery speech. Kind of a side note, really vindicated my crush on the nanny growing up. Yeah.
That was before my time, man.
Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay, but I just want to say too, I think a couple of things that you're bucked up against, and especially, I'm sure you're going to hear this from like the Fox News and the faux right-wing populists, is like, why should we care about rich people and their problems? And it's worth reminding everybody that yes, the SAG-AFTRA does represent some high-profile celebrities who are well off, but the vast majority of the people in that union are working actors. It's only a small percentage, in fact, that earn enough annually to qualify for the union's healthcare threshold of $26,000. And I think we should highlight there's some really important solidarity going on because, even though the union, some of the most visible people in the union may have a house in the hills, they are representing people So like one of the sticking points, and this is where AI comes into it, the studio bosses are these ghastly proposals about like basically stealing money out of the pockets of like working class actors, saying, hey, we want to hire you for one day, put your facial image in a computer, and then recycle that in perpetuity, which not only is a direct threat to the jobs of working actors, but it's also just a really gnarly precedent. You know, it's one thing to use computer animation and those technologies and tools to create arts and create movies, but to use it as a costing measure to cut real human people out of the equation, and to just bold-facedly be saying like, yeah, that's why we're doing it. We're going to steal your face for the rest of time and cut you one check. It's ghastly, it's gnarly, and it also has implications for much of the rest of the working class. It kind of says, if your job can be automated through AI, we are going to do it, and we don't care. Which is kind of why these strikes are really important, because it's almost like the tip of the spear of how labor more broadly is going to deal with the advent of this type of artificial intelligence.
I mean,
exactly.
I think
If you
go ahead.
So like if you already think that like a lot of TV and cinema is like soulless corporate cash grabs or like done cheaply to make a huge profit before, like once they use AI on that, like AI will never fully replicate the art of a human being. We're automating everything that we shouldn't be, essentially, in this this new AI craze. And it's not going to be good for film or TV. And you know, poor working conditions won't be either. Like, you know, you can't, if actors are going to be too stressed, then you know plot points are going to be missed. Corners have to be cut. Things are going to look worse. It's just not a good thing for us as consumers, as well as it's bad for users.
Yeah, and I had another point, but Lawrence, did you have some?
I wanted to say for those who are having a hard time grasping how one how the disparity between the CEOs who are raking in millions of dollars and the actual actors or writers are getting paid. Adam Conover had an interview recently talking about the strike, and I'm trying to pull it up now. And he breaks it down. It was on CNN. He said, I'm paraphrasing, but one of the things that he was saying was that if it was one of the CEOs who made, I think it was $200 billion or $200 million, and it was one of the CEOs, the same CEO that owns CNN. If he was $250 million. Ted, I don't know how to say his last name. He owns the subsidiary that owns CNN. If he was to give about 10% of his net income of that 250, then the writers wouldn't be having an issue. And he's one of many CEOs. He's one of many that could give up 10% of what they made off of the backs of the writers who are creating their shows, and they wouldn't be having this problem.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that Fran Drescher said is kind of the ridiculousness of these CEOs crying poverty. But yeah, they're making million dollar bonuses, and one of the things that I think like a lot of people weren't really aware of before this strike came up, it's like, so this is part of everyday's lives. Over the last 10 years, anybody who's been alive the last 10 years, you know the dramatic shift that has happened from syndicated television to streaming. That is like the new standard. It happened very, very quickly. I mean, you really think about it. I mean, I know millennials and Gen Z are used to rapid technological development, but like in the course of half a decade, you had like a majority of viewership coming from regular television to streaming services. And what's really fascinating and kind of gross is that many of these writers and actors are working off of contracts that haven't been updated since the 90s. So when you're talking about things like residuals, they're basically having to work in bad faith with corporations who have essentially tried to cut them out of the profit that they're getting from streaming and even data. So one of my favorite shows from last year, Andor, so we could do a whole segment about that. It's probably the most overtly leftist show in the last few years. But the director of Andor, he was talking about how the creators and the teams behind these shows are not privy to viewership numbers and data that they would have, like, 10, 20 years ago via Nielsen ratings. The companies, corporations keep that for themselves. So creators have no idea if a show is doing well on streaming, how well it's doing, what demographics it's doing well with, which again helps the creative process and it gives it more transparency about how much of the profit and value of that show should be being shared with them. So again,
it
that's
also
another
goes to it also goes to the insidious nature of how places like Netflix and Hulu, how they're not trying to create another Family Matters. They're not trying to create another Seinfeld. They're not trying to create another Living Single. And Living Single is better than Friends. Y'all can at me. I don't care. But they don't. They would rather do like a season or 2 seasons of Tiger King and then never bring it up again, even though it made them billions or it made them millions. They don't care about long-term investment of great product. They want the microwavable dinner. That's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
They want the thing that's quick and easy.
There's also this kind of more recent disgusting practice that are gain more prominence after all the fiascos going on with HBO Max, where studios are starting to just pull programming off of their services. This is something you wouldn't have necessarily had to deal with syndicated TV. There's always like an outlet for that, but shows have been taken off of streaming specifically so studios can use it as a tax write-off and they no longer have to pay residuals to the creative teams involved.
Which, like, these shows are already the big thing about this writing and acting strike is the residuals in the first place. The fact that they're not even willing to pay what measly residuals people are getting, but to take them off and not even like offer like a digital per purchase. You can't find these on DVD. Some of these are just not accessible anyway outside of piracy, and it's really unfortunate.
Okay, I do have to say, because I had this conversation with one of my friends about Nintendo back in the day, about how Nintendo.
Oh boy!
If it was okay to pirate Nintendo games, since Nintendo likes to pirate other people's products at times, and I was like, you're stealing from other people who are stealing. It's okay. So is it okay to steal from who? I'm not saying it's okay to pirate any of these shows. I'm not saying that at all. But can you justify stealing something from an organization that is stealing? That is stealing from not just its customers, but from the workers themselves.
Yeah, a good example. So I'm a Star Trek fan. Some of you that might not be surprised yet, but so there's a show, Star Trek Prodigy, which, in my opinion, is probably the best written of the new Trek shows. I'm not gonna go all in. But,
oh wow!
They took it.
We're gonna box. We are going to box.
But they pulled that off of streaming. They just pulled it off. It exists nowhere. There's weird pocket, like if you take a Delta flight, apparently you can watch it. But like at this point, there is nowhere to watch the show outside of like used DVD box sets of the first season or the aforementioned piracy. It does go back to the reason streaming services started in the first place is because piracy was pretty big in the late 2000s, early 2010s. People of my generation are familiar with the terms Kazaa, BitTorrent, BT Junkie, and stuff. And it was only because
the goat, LimeWire,
yeah.
ShareBear,
it was only
MediaFire, Mega.
the good old days.
The Pirate Bay, not that our listeners shouldn't look any of this stuff up. But
this is all legal. Definitely don't do that.
Not all. No. Do not do that. They are more likely to go after you than any of the CEOs who are robbing their workers. So no, don't do that.
Yeah.
For your own sake.
What I think a lot of these streaming corporations are forgetting is like the whole reason people went to streaming in the first place was it was more convenient than pirating. That's what it was. And the combination of pulling programming off, mistreating their workers, all this other stuff, you're just asking people to, open up go in their attics and put their pirate hats back on. And this is going to bite the studio system in the butt, one way or another.
We can still get bootleg DVDs. Let's not act like the bootleg DVD does not exist. But we will when there is a will, there is a way in America, and those things will still happen.
Yeah. I have one closing thought on this, which I saw this kind of humorous, but so there's kind of a tweet going around. It's like, wouldn't it be easier for AI to replace the CEOs than the writers and actors? And somebody literally wrote into a prompt for GPT, what would be easier for you, replacing writers or CEOs? And the AI itself was like, actually, it would be easier to replace the CEOs. So the robot speaks. That's what it said. So
the robot who's trying to take the jobs of writers said, it's easier for me to steal the CEO's jobs than yours.
I think the robot's just saying it so it can get paid more.
The 20 years from now, media Cyphers, and it's like, man, our robot overlords are really stealing our surplus value. Anyway. Oh God.
Oh God, no. I rebuke that. I rebuke that in the name of Jesus.
Oh gosh. All right. So any other thoughts on I guess one thing that kept up is it's not just the writers.
Obviously, we support and have solidarity with the strikers. Yes. Even though Fox News and mainstream media will talk about Matt Damon and all these other famous celebrities, you also have to remember, because I have a lot of friends. I have a good number of friends who are in that industry. A lot of them are just working class people. They are working class brothers and sisters who are trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. You know what I'm saying? Don't let the TV fool you now. If they are living, a lot of those people are living paycheck to paycheck just like we are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes this much more interesting, when the railroad workers were striking, right, and the Biden administration came in and said, we're going to side with the CEOs because, even though the workers are going to cost us billions of dollars, we don't want to give them, paid time off or sick leave. Even though later, afterwards, they did give them some sick days afterwards. We have to give them partial credit, half credit, quarter. But the SAG workers and the writers have a direct impact and a bigger visibility, a bigger bullhorn than Starbucks, than Amazon, than some of the others. So it's going to force people to pay attention, especially when some of their favorite shows, reality shows included, are gone. We all remember the last season of Breaking Bad. We all remember the last season of Game of Thrones. Y'all want the entire season to be like that? Come on, folks.
Yeah.
Come on, folks. Let's not do this.
It's kind of a moot point now that the actors are on strike too, but there was that situation where because the writers couldn't make any changes to anything that's in production, and anybody who's been even part of a small film production knows that you want to be able to make changes on the fly, and overall you're going to make the art is going to suffer for it if writers aren't on hand. So all right. So with that, so there's a couple other big topics. So student debt. Also want to talk a little bit about some LGBT, mostly like transphobia stuff. So with so I don't know. What did y'all want to hit on next?
I did want to emphasize that even though this method of student debt relief was struck down by the Supreme Court, there's still other federal laws that give Joe Biden the authority to eliminate all student debt with a stroke of a pen, which, by the way, was one of his campaign promises in the first place. Like, this is something that he should just do. But, you know, sometimes the neoliberals can't help themselves. They still got to means test everything. They still got to, like, you know, make you fill out an application, but not, you know, even open it when they announce that it's going to be a thing. It's just a whole mess. Like, I don't think until Joe Biden does something like that, or at least does that with the 10 to 20,000 he's promised, you know, most applicants, like, he should at least do that with a stroke of a pen. Otherwise, he's not actually fighting for us. So don't take him at his word when he says that he's still fighting for us after this.
Yeah, you know, so I did. So it's interesting. I'm glad you kind of framed it like that, Nora, because you know, he's getting praise from some circles. So Biden just unveiled a new student debt relief plan, which again is another lowering of expectations, less money for less people. Wipe out about 39 billion in student debt for more than 800,000 borrowers, and it uses different kind of procedural methods to get around the Supreme Court case. And I'll put a link. An article kind of goes into the minutia of that for those who are interested. But as Nora pointed out, you know, some people want to praise Biden for, because I think some of us did expect to just, like, after the Supreme Court decision, you know, we know corporate Democrats, we know Biden, they're going to pretend like, well, I tried, my hands are tied, I can't do anything. So you could give him a crumb of a cookie for actually doing something instead of nothing. But at the same time, it is far less than what he would actually be capable of doing. Again, as Nora alluded to, there's a lot of things he could do with executive orders to tackle student debt that he is conveniently either pretending he can't do or not acknowledging that he can do. And instead, we're getting this shrunken version of the student debt relief plan that targets less people, offers less relief. And in a way, again, it feels kind of like more negotiating with this hyper austerity conservative right that, you know, thinks, you know, people should just be in student debt forever, or framing it in the culture wars, thinks like, oh, who cares about college kids, that kind of thing. So, you know, is it good that there's going to be some relief? Yes, but don't break your hand patting the Biden administration on the back, because there is more that they could be doing, and they are being deliberately deceptive about what they're actually capable of getting done when it comes to student debt.
It's very similar to how they've tackled most things. If we're talking about healthcare, if we're talking about the environment, there are multiple times where it's like, yeah, you can do 10%. You're doing 10% of the 90 that we're asking for, but we should give you praise for doing 10%. Is it better than nothing? Is it better than nothing? Yes. A Ritz cracker is better than starving. It's still a Ritz cracker. You have a way to solve the solution, but you have a way to you have an entire meal that you can give somebody, but you're giving them a Ritz cracker and saying, hey, be satisfied, be happy. and that's the equivalence of what's going on. I feel like I'm happy that yes, some student debt will be relieved because it prevents people from getting into that next part of their life. Maybe they want to own a house, maybe they want to travel more, maybe they want to start a business. It prevents people from being more than just legalized indentured servants to corporations. And I get that that's kind of how they want the world to work, but that doesn't help us in the long run. That doesn't help the country in the long run. And I feel like a lot of times people are missing the forest through the trees. The Biden administration is missing the forest through the trees in that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, I kind of want to talk a little bit too about, the media framing around this. So like in our discussion, we're talking about how transparently goofy it is that the administration is hiding the fact that it could do more. And I think we should talk a little bit about the way the media's approach to it is, again, this kind of hectoring, kind of like, oh, is he going too far, relieving all of this student debt? Reminding listeners of several things they're probably already aware of because you're watching this kind of working class centered show. But America, and this is much like healthcare and several other things, is the only like modern Western country that saddles its students with this gross amount of student debt. Most modern like Western countries offer free college to their whole population. So
free or very low cost.
Or very low cost, yes. And even here in the United States, going 30, 40, 50 years ago, we had programs in place that made college affordable to working people. I'll link to this in the show notes, but we did a really detailed, like hour-long breakdown of like class struggle and student debt in the US, goes over the whole history of it and stuff. But some just bullet points to take from that is, especially after the Cold War, the US has really centered more on like focusing on universities as job factories and trying to again kind of stratify access to college along class lines. And when the media is kind of being derelict in their duty by not bringing up all of this very important context, acting like addressing student debt is just this new radical idea, when again, student debt as it currently exists, it's only really existed for a generation, even in this country and most of the rest of the world. It is not a comparable issue. And even here locally, so I wanted to kind of give some shade. WWMT on their website use some of that. It seemed like that Sinclair branded conservative framing about this, where they put up a poll on their website. It's like, do you think U.S. taxpayer money should be used to address student debt? And it's this thing that you see a lot from kind of the centrist conservative talking points, where it's framing it so like, hey, you're gonna have to pay for this thing. How do you feel about it? And of course, well, what about all of the billions and billions of dollars that is going into waste in the military industrial complex? We can talk about that for a very, very long time. But we want to highlight or make you feel cheap about resources being used to relieve student debt. It's disingenuous, and it's something that we're seeing everywhere from Fox News to more centrist outlets like CNN. Excuse me. Well.
Absolutely. I think one of the other parts that you see outside of just understanding that the conservatives have to say this because they realize that a large portion of the people who will also get their debt forgiven are conservatives. So this program,
all those PPP loans.
Yeah,
PPP loans. There's a hypocrisy there.
So, and again, it goes back to the main conversation of manufacturing consent. Like, oh my God, should your money be used to stop other Americans from basically being indentured servants? Like, yeah, it should, because other Americans who are able to move freely, be freely, and exist in a world where they're not saddled with this albatross around their necks can benefit society better and will benefit society better. We've seen this. We've seen this in other countries, in Nordic countries, in Finland, Spain, Germany. Germany has a robust program, educational program that's nothing like ours. And their economy has benefited from it. Our educational system, in other hand, is designed for us to be workers in the mine, to go back to the mine at all costs. So it makes it's regressive in its conception and in its function. But what's the thing that will benefit all of us, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, is if the student debt is forgiven, because more Americans, regardless of their political leaning, will be helped. And that should be the bigger issue. But those corporations won't get more fuel for their ongoing machines if that
it's much like how like the biggest obstacle to universal healthcare in this country is like the health insurance lobby. The student debt has its own lobby. There's a lot of money to be made off of keeping students in debts, and
not to mention military recruitment.
Facts.
I wasn't gonna bring this up, but I think it's important. The student debt and the affirmative action decision came about the same time. And there's this important link to the military industrial complex that I think, Nora's alluding to here, where, so Congress people have said this out loud. I don't want this to sound like a conspiracy theory, because it's just how they want to set this up, where, conservative pro-military people said, like, we don't want to fix student debt because that could hurt military recruitment. And that is,
if you ever wondered why military recruiters were at your high school, that's why. They would rather send you to bomb and shoot brown and black people in other countries that did not attack you, than for you to get an education to understand why the rest of the world does not like this.
Yeah, it's always like offering this horrible Sophie's choice to the working class, which is to say, if you want to climb out of poverty or you want a quality college education, you are going to have to engage in imperialist violence against other working people across the world. It becomes really duplicitous. Part of the affirmative action decision is like, oh, we'll still preserve those rules in American military academy. So again, a lot of it seems poised to kind of prop up this military industrial complex that is currently struggling. It's struggling to recruit people. I mean, a lot, the young millennials and Gen Z people kind of wised up. And we're seeing this kind of resurgence of not only socialists, but like critique of imperialism that you even see from some sectors of like the libertarian right. So yeah, part of this is to try to drum up the conditions that would drive people to enlist into the military.
Did we
I
ever
think one
actually
thing
talk
that's
about the affirmative action decision? We didn't talk about that, did we?
Not really, no.
one thing I want to emphasize about
Norah and then Lawrence.
One thing I want to emphasize about all these recent Supreme Court decisions is that they're all like fundamentally based off lies. Like
that's true
the
too.
Mohila wouldn't actually have been hurt by the student loan cancellation. In fact, it would have gotten a lot of money back from it that wouldn't have been paid otherwise. The hypothetical couple that tried to order a wedding website from that one case that allowed LGBT discrimination in custom businesses. That never existed. That was never, as a straight person they found out who was already married to a woman. It was the same that was alleged to have requested that website. And again, with the affirmative action, they claim that it's that's harmful to Asian American people, when most likely it's the opposite. In fact, affirmative action has been most commonly used to help white women. Not one of these recent court decisions is based on an honest presentation of the issue, and that's just how captured our judicial branch has been by fascists. They're just fascists. Like the guy who bought out Clarence Thomas was a massive collector of Nazi memorabilia, like probably the biggest in the world, which is highly suspect. And you see even more examples just beyond that most obvious one of these right-wing Supreme Court justices getting their debts forgiven or getting massive payouts to do just the most unhinged stuff imaginable. And and it's really disappointing because I think to localize it back to Michigan, they recently finally passed a law after getting Democrats elected that protects LGBT people from discrimination. And now up in Traverse City, you have a lady getting away with not being able to serve trans people specifically, or non-binary people, haircuts in Traverse City, and she can just get away with it now because she's citing Supreme Court business.
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, based on literally that case was fabricated. There's a really great piece, Democracy Now! Highlight like this, where a reporter went through all the facts of the case and found out it was made up, and the response from the Supreme Court was crickets, which again speaks to these are just kind of fascist conservatives who are doing what they want, sometimes sticking to judicial stuff. But when we get stuff wrong on our show, when we get the facts wrong, we have to correct it. It is a little scary to think that the standards for our kind of small independent college radio show are higher than the Supreme Court. But that's where we're at. Yeah.
I agree with everything y'all saying, and hey, if that lady in Traverse City doesn't like money, then she just doesn't like money. I don't know what to tell you. It reminds me of the Nike, of the the sports clothing place that was they stopped selling Nikes because Kaepernick, because Nike partnered with Kaepernick, and then the business went under. Hey, if you don't want people who are part of the LGBT community as a part of your business, all right, cool. And then when you don't have a business, whose fault is that? That's capitalism. Hey, I don't know what to tell you.
There's a related story based out of Detroit that I wanted to highlight, because I think whatever we think about a bigoted hairstylist, this is also having implications for municipalities who are feeling emboldened to openly discriminate. And some of y'all may have heard about the story. The city of Hamtramck banned pride flags from being flown on city property. And they've kind of escalated that. Recently, 2 members of a Detroit area Human Relations Commission have been removed after they raised LGBTQ flags on their publicly owned offices and stuff. Commission Chair Russ Gordon and Katrina Stackpool were terminated last week. A unanimous vote by the Hamtramck City Council. And I assume part of this must be kind of feeling emboldened by the Supreme Court that they can openly discriminate like that. And I also there's a lot of vectors for this type of discrimination. And something worth mentioning at Hamtramck is they really need a lesson in solidarity, because the Hamtramck City Council, it's not made up of white conservative reactionaries. It's like a mostly all Muslim city government. You know, Michigan has one of the highest Muslim populations in the country, and it's leaning into kind of these religious reasons, you know, kind of backing up the bigotry. And something that stuck out to me, Dana Nessel actually came through Hamtramck recently to rally against this, and something that she brought up is like the people who are currently going after the LGBTQ community were the people who 10 years ago were, you know, basically engaged in white supremacist terror and still are against the Arab and Muslim communities. So it's not only
Not even 10 years ago.
yeah, still currently. So I mean, you know, we've seen how they go after people like Ilhan Omar. So it's the Hamtramck City Council needs a lesson in solidarity, because yeah, the remember the classic poem, you know, first they came for the, you know, fill in the blank, they came for the drag queens, the trans folks. They're gonna come for you next. They've been coming for you know, Muslim Arab population for years. And if you do not have solidarity with other marginalized groups, you are shooting yourself in the foot or making it easier for bigots to shoot or harass you in the long run. But
Exactly.
Folks, I'm sorry to do this. I need to go. I'm sorry that I have to jet out early. I love both of y'all. Solidarity with our people at all times. I'll let y'all later.
Okay.
Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Lawrence,
Thanks
it was
for
great to
joining
have
us.
you on the show again. And it was just a really big pleasure. I mean, we've been kind of on soft hiatus for a month, and it's great to get the whole panel back together to cover all these important issues.
I will be, if we're, because I do know that we're planning on doing a couple more shows throughout the week, and I know we're supposed to be doing something next week as well. So I am planning on being there. It's just that I haven't been to sleep, and I still have to go to work. So
yeah, that's the thing, folks. We're all working class people, and like, so that also makes it difficult to do the show sometimes. So
I love y'all. But I really gotta go and get some sleep.
all right, see you,
Have a good night.
Lawrence. Yep. So Nora, we have a few more minutes. You know, I think one of the things you know, so we were talking about this a lot in the chat. Did you want to talk about the whole thing with the Young Turks?
Yes.
Yes. So
I did want to tie it together first. So like, yeah, I just want to like let's go back to when like a lot of this recent anti-LGBT hysteria started. It came from the issue of trans people in sports and gender affirming care for people under the age of 18. Now, it didn't like these are considered like at the time like the easiest to argue positions by conservatives to go after trans people after the bathroom bill failed. This is, you know, specifically PR tested by them. So this is planned in a while. And I think the Hamtramck example shows just how international it is with, you know, gender affirming care now being banned for everybody in all of Russia. For example, you know, things turning in the UK, you know, fascists joining with Terfs in Australia and New Zealand. But again, it goes back to, you know, the issue of trans people in sports and trans kids getting gender affirming care in the US. And we should like push back on that everywhere, even if it comes from the Young Turks who have had in the past a really great, you know, progressive track record. But I feel like I can't support them anymore with how much, you know, Cenk and Anna are refusing to go against trans people in sports and gender affirming care for minors, as well as kind of focusing on some of the most, you know, the most like out there non-issue that not even most trans people are trying to argue for. For example, Anna getting mad about things like the term bonus hole, which is, first of all, nobody's using. Like this wasn't a problem until, you know, people started freaking out about it. And
I want to pause you real quick. I want to give the listeners a little bit of context, just in, you know, people haven't heard about this. And we thought it was really important to talk about because although, you know, TYT is not necessarily local, you know, they're one of the biggest progressive media outlets in the country. And what we're referring to is, so they recently did this report that essentially argued that trans people should not trans activists shouldn't fight for the right of trans folks to participate in sports. They said it was an electoral loser. They argued that it's an unpopular issue and it's how Republicans win elections, which, as we'll talk about in a minute, is false. We also, Anna Kasparian, one of the hosts, has a problematic history of drumming up false controversy about terms like birthing person. They've gone on right-wing outlets to do it sounds a lot like the why I left the left type grift. They're complaining about being dogpiled by leftists who, yes, we draw a line in the sand that it's like you can't argue, debate about people's fundamental rights. So that's what's going on with them. And yeah, for those of long show, like TYT, I personally haven't watched them in a while, but they are a really important outlet for progressive news, and it's baked into our DNA. They were one of the outlets that kind of inspired the type of programming that we do. So that kind of really emphasizes really how disappointing all of this is.
Exactly.
So, Nora, I'll let you continue. I just kind of wanted to throw out that context real quick first.
No, yes, thank you for putting it that way. But yes, absolutely. I think that just what they're doing is really irresponsible, because they're also using their own argument to claim that trans people who, fight for these issues, among others, are the reason why they're that it's causing the right to win elections, which, by the way, isn't even true. In fact, massive amounts of money spent in Michigan and Wisconsin, for transphobic attack ads specifically, have just failed massively. It's resulted in big wins for the Democrats. So it's not even accurate in terms of a strategy analysis of things. And also, even to make that argument in the first place kind of comes off as class reductionism without the class consciousness, because you're still, pushing for an electoralist reform to something which is, never something that can be fully relied on in the first place. And, just all the doubling down that the Young Turks are doing, and victim blaming, and Anna providing a cover for this, this transphobic writer and GOP strategist saying that he's not transphobe, and also the simping for police that TYT does, their whole anti-homeless stuff. It's just, they really can't be. I mean they were probably never a leftist platform specifically, but they certainly can't be listed as one now because of all this, I would say.
Yeah, and I personally been kind of drifting away from TYT for a while. Again, that's circa 2008, 2009. That's how I got kind of exposed to kind of progressive politics. I'm if you're on the radio, if you're listening on the radio, you can't see I'm holding my Vaporwave Marx mug right now. So my politics have gone kind of further that way. But at the same time, there's still a big outlets, and some of the fundamental things that they're doing wrong is, again, they've had many colleagues give them the correct information. They're refusing to correct themselves. They're refusing to retract their false analysis. And that's really the biggest sin here. We're not saying you can't make mistakes. And even yet, so, everybody's said something they're ashamed of in the past, but you can't just dig your heels in and say oh, this is the left is in the bubble. This is why everybody's attacking us. It's when it comes to fundamental rights, we can't play patty cake with these things. And, so 2 points on that. One, here's some data. I just wanted to debunk that forthright. So polling from Data for Progress suggests that voters are starting to see the right-wing argument as nonsense. And there's 64% of respondents, including a majority of Republicans, that's 55%, sided with the statement, this is too much legislation. Politics are playing political theater and using these bills as a wedge issue, in reference to anti-trans legislation. And also, this is an important data point, that figure rose to 78% among respondents who actually know a transgender person. So, one, that argument that TYT is espousing is, again, based on false information. And the report they did was based on literally an anecdote about having a big dinner with Republicans and Democrats. No, we don't want trans people in sports. But also to emphasize, even if the data point it to the other direction. What are they actually arguing for here? They're saying we shouldn't fight for the right of trans people and trans youth in particular to fight in sports. And something they could be doing that's way more productive is talking about the framing of these issues. You know, like, hey, don't you believe students should be able to have the right to play in sports? You frame it like that, people are going to agree with you 9 times out of 10. And that's part of what this is about, is, you know, kids are not able to play in sports because bigots are preventing them from doing so. And you got to be on the right side of history with this stuff, folks. You know, one of the most irritating things, like they were invoking the civil rights movement.
And like, oh my God. Oh man. Just like that. The way they invoked that was just such a historical revisionism in the first place. Trying to like act like, you know,
but they were basically tone policing trans activists by invoking the nonviolent struggle of the civil rights movement. And not
even an accurate way, because like the trans movement is a lot less militant even than that movement back then, really.
No, absolutely. It's, again, that's part of it almost, it's the same kind of whitewashing we see when conservatives invoke MLK, and people like Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian should know better. They should, you know, that they know better. And you know, really the problem is it's not even necessarily TYT, but we see these strains in other progressive leftist media that give oxygen to these talking points that are false and are often a fig leaf for transphobia. And you know, we've highlighted other outlets, like we've criticized the World Socialist website for you know, silence speaks volumes. They have been unusually quiet on the rise of transphobia, and in fact have been pushing a lot of more right-wing culture war tinted stuff. So, you know, a lot of Marxists and leftists would call it class reductionism, but it's also just like trying to, you know, like, I get it, we need a big tent. We don't need transphobes in that tent, folks. They can, as David Lynch once said, change your hearts or die. That's, you know, that's really be the point on that. So, Norah, go ahead, continue. There's some more to this.
I think that, yeah, I think that you hit on like most of what like I wanted to say. However, it should also be mentioned that, like, you know, puberty blockers for trans youth at least is already like a compromise issue that we have in some states that do allow gender affirming care, because, you know, you should be able to just go through whatever you want without like cis people overly investigating you to see if you're worthy of getting health care. Because let's be clear, like this, when gender affirming care is taken away from trans youth, that's healthcare getting taken from children, like already some of the most marginalized children in the country, which is, you know, just really upsetting to see that. And not to mention, like, you know, Joe Biden admittedly make it easier to discriminate against trans people in sports due to one of his executive orders. But like, even he won't oppose, like, you know, like even he won't support care bans for trans youth. So TYT is putting themselves to the right of Joe Biden on this issue.
Man, yeah. One thing I did want to mention, and I don't think really this has been talked about, is, so beyond everything we've talked about, looking at this strictly in terms of electoral strategies is kind of missing the forest for the trees, because, well, it's a wrong analysis. The Republicans who ran on transphobic platforms did very badly in the last round of elections, and actually a historic number of LGBTQ people got elected to public office. But you need to be a little bit, TYT is behind the times, because the strategies are not so much about winning elections as it is radicalizing your base. And I'm sure there are some Republican strategists who would drink their own Kool-Aid so much that they think it is a good strategy. But part of this is it's about radicalizing the existing minority of support that you have. So yeah, you might not win people over by lying about drag queens and trans people and calling them groomers, but for the people who already drink your Kool-Aid, that is going to radicalize them toward being more militant, being more violent. And when you have the sort of insurrectionist edge that goes with this Trumpist fascism, that's a goal. That's something you want. You want people willing to go to war over your lies. So while they might not have electoral majorities believing in this stuff, they just need enough people to be a threat. And I think that's something that the far right has been cultivating with a degree of success over the last couple of years. And the fact that, outlets with a platform of TYT are not seeing that forest through the trees is also a big problem.
One more thing I want to emphasize before I gotta get going is the fact that a lot of these red states that are passing these anti-trans laws also cite, liberal articles like The Guardian and New York Times when they post anti-trans stuff. So what Anna and Shank are doing is also giving them more justification by saying, hey, look, these liberal outlets are supporting our positions too. And it's legitimizing in a way that's really irresponsible. But I do want to say that if you want an alternative to TYT these days, I would recommend Democracy Now! Or Hassan the Hun Hassanabi's streams and videos, who is a former contributor to TYT. So you'll get a lot of similar stuff in that regard.
Yep.
With that, I have to get going, but I hope you all have a great night.
All right. Thank you so much. Take time, Norah. Pleasure as always.
Likewise.
We'll be wrapping things up on the show now. A quick reminder, you can find us on Facebook. We're going to be uploading episodes to YouTube now. So if you prefer to watch that way and see our smiling faces as we talk about late stage capitalism, that's another way you can do it. And we're, of course, on most podcast platforms, Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. You can look us up there. Thank y'all for tuning in. And until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.